Hello everyone, nubkeks here. Welcome back to Nub Raids, and today it is finally time to talk about our boy Thor. Yes, Thor is the next fusion coming to Raid. We've got his full skills to break down in today's video. The fusion will start next week, the 5th of September, Thursday. Next Thursday. So, yeah, slightly under a week to go. Exciting stuff, and it's going to be a difficult type of fusion, actually, the most difficult type of fusion. In fact, we'll look at his skills now in a second. It's going to be what are they called, like a mixed fusion, where you have to collect epic champions by collecting their fragments, and then you have to fuse the epics into the legendary. These are by far the hardest. Why? Because if you miss the epic fragments, it can become extremely difficult to ever catch back up. So you usually have to do every single event to get all the epic fragments. And then you've got to do some extra work as well, because you got to level up the epics, ascend the epics, and then fuse them into Thor, which costs silver. So these are, yeah, basically the worst type of fusion, unfortunately. Just pure fragments for the legendary and themselves being the easiest. Fusions being the middle. These mixed fusions are pretty nasty. Let's take a look at him, though. So Thor Faehammer, there he is. I think he looks sick as well. I think he is the coolest looking of the designs. For me, like, I love all the different colors. It's just badass. Very Celtic. It sort of feels to me in a weird sort of way, as opposed to Nordic, like the ginger and the pants and stuff. I don't know. It just screams quite a sort of fusion of Celtic and Norse, Scandinavian stuff. I mean, there's Scandinavian influence on like sort of Celtic countries, Ireland, etc. But yeah, the hammer looks freaking cool in game as well. So for his skills, he is an attack-based champion. Let's go through them one by one. Wrath of Mjolnir attacks one enemy 2 times, 20% chance to repeat the attack. Each hit decreases the target's turn meter by 10%. So that's actually kind of funky, right? So if it does repeat, whoo boy, you could get up to 40% turn meter pushback and probably a ton of damage. So that is very, very potentially strong, and it does synergize very strongly with his passive and ally attacks and counterattacks, which we'll come back to later. So this A1, I think, is actually a bit more exciting than it initially sounds. His A2, Fulminous Ricochet, forward that goes to a 3-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies. After hitting the first enemy, will hit every other enemy in a random order. Following the initial hit, each subsequent hit increases the damage inflicted by 25%, up to 100%. Ignores block damage and unkillable, though that effect does not work against bosses. That's a bit of a bummer, right? Odin is in there, and Odin's putting out block damage on himself. Would have been kind of fun to have Thor come in and like nuke him down with this. I'm very curious. So it's like a bouncing attack, really. I'm curious, does this count as single target attacks and therefore bypass AoE damage reduction, such as Duchess passive or the Hydra Head passives, which reduce AoE damage? Does it count as single target hits, or will it count as AoE? I'm not sure. But there's going to be a good chunk of randomness to this, because obviously the final enemy that it hits is going to be hit the hardest. In fact, the later the enemies are hit, the the harder they're going to be hit. So I suppose in arena, you want to pick the enemy for your initial attack that you are least excited to do damage to, and then hope that it will sort of bounce around and do the damage where you need it to go. I'm very curious to see how this works in person. When obviously against like fights like Spider, where you've got tons of enemies, this thing is going to do absolutely monstrous damage by the time it gets to the final hit. So that does have some interesting potential in the future. Any fights where you've got lots of enemies, this could be nuts. So that's an interesting. It's interesting, very interesting. Hammer of Heaven. This goes to a 3-turn cooldown. Lots of books for this one, but 3-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies. Before attacking, puts increased attack and increased crit damage on Thor for 2 turns. Has a 75 goes to 100% chance to permanently decrease the resistance of each enemy by 10%, stacking up to 50%. Ooh, again, that is kind of spicy. Certainly in, I don't know, fights that go long enough. Certainly in Hydra, this could be letting you much more easily place debuffs. That's going to stack up pretty quick. I'm not sure if you would use that too much for any specific strategies right now. So Iron Twins has very high resistance, for instance. I mean, you could do a longer run in Iron Twins. stack up the decrease resist with Thor and then start debuffing? Be pretty weird, but that's an interesting one. But then also has a 75 bucking to 100% chance of placing decreased speed on all enemies for 2 turns. That is actually phenomenal for players in general. AoE decreased speed is quite a difficult debuff to have, and it can be very strong for wave content, very strong for Hydra. It's like crucial, really, for Hydra. So the fact that Thor is coming in and bringing that, on top of bringing a ton of extra damage, this immediately is making him a very viable Hydra champion. You have to watch out for Head of Mischief. He will be targeted by Mischief. But I suppose your goal with this might be to just simply do enough damage with Thor to just kill Mischief very, very fast, honestly. Then his passive, this is also very hype. Sky Rupture. Every time this champion deals damage, increase the Thunder counter by 1, stacking up to 10. Each Thunder stack increases his damage by 3%, up to 30%. But once the Thunder counter reaches 10, attacks all enemies and places a stun debuff for 1 turn. After the attack, the Thunder counter resets to 0. This is absolutely bonkers. So, number 1, you're just doing more damage. So, again, this is going to sort of, the Thunder counter, every time it deals damage, I presume this is going to add even more scaling onto Fulminous Ricochet, right? So, that's another increased damage that's going to be stacking up with each hit and making the later hits hit harder. That's cool. But he's got 2 AoEs on 3-turn cooldowns. That's extremely good, by the way. 2 3-turn cooldown AoEs. That's better than many Void legendaries. Like Ethos, eat your heart out. This guy's got 2 3-turns. It's extremely good. He'll rip through campaign, right? Thor is going to destroy campaign. Absolute nightmare campaign. He's going to rip it apart, most likely. Because he's just got multiple AoEs and he self-buffs. He's just going to just blast them. And he's got this passive for even more AoEs. It's nuts. This is where, again, you can see the synergies of his kits. So he's going to definitely thrive. The more enemies there are, the more nuts he's going to be. Because his Thunder counter is going to stack up faster for more damage and more extra attacks. His A1, you can see now, this chance to repeat the attack. Okay, not only are we getting lots of turn meters decreasing, but it's also going to build up that Thunder counter faster. Like if you get 4 hits on his A1, wow, 4 stacks on the Thunder counter, that's kind of nuts. So I think Thor is looking to have a lot of potential with ally attack champions, with counter attack champions, to really stack this up quickly. Yeah, pretty consistent way to get AoE stun. I mean, you go into Arena. I guess this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So we go into Arena. We open with Hammer of Heaven. We smack all 4 of the enemies. We decrease their resistance as well, which is nice. On our second turn, we do a Fulminous Ricochet. Now, in Arena, there's 4 enemies. So we will have hit 4 and another 4. We'll have hit them 8 times. I guess the nice thing is, if Thor ever gets even a single counterattack within that space, or a single ally attack either, a couple of hits of Wrath of Mjolnir, you will trigger that Sky Rupture with one of the moves, which is kind of nuts. Or worst case scenario, A3, A2, his A1, the double hit, that's 10 hits. His A1 then suddenly becomes a way to trigger the AoE attack, which is actually kind of awesome. So yeah, there's a lot going on with Thor. I think one thing that could be very interesting, they actually showed him a little bit 10 days ago in the Asgard Divide sneak peek. So if we click play just for a few seconds here is all we can see. But they did show Thor's animations. I've got it muted. Let me, hang on, there we go. So here it's going in with Fulminous Ricochet.
Out there. Introducing one of Ray.
So you can see that, like, it's hitting each person. It's hitting them all at the same time, but I guess the order is random. That's kind of interesting. Go back a bit.
There. Introducing one of Raid's biggest events.
And there he goes in. Sky Rupture. Now, one thing I can instantly see from this, we'll mute this back again, is his actual active attack. Like, that move absolutely clapped. That was hitting for like 100,000 up to 270,000. That's a big, big hit. And we can see Sky Rupture coming in, 42,000. That's not doing as much damage, right? So it looks like you're not going to be getting crazy damage out of Sky Rupture. The extra attack, it's not going to do insane damage. I'm sure it will add up in like Hydra and longer fights. But my gosh, for Arena or wave-based content, just constantly pumping out those stuns very regularly is going to be insane. And again, this is very, very interesting as well to me in terms of like the spider dungeon. If they ever add more levels of spider hard, it's very interesting, for any new dungeons in the future. Like if they put in any new dungeon, like think about the new Odin dungeon, where at higher levels you're fighting 5 enemies, Odin and his 4 allies. It's 5, right? Any dungeons in the future as well, where you're fighting many, many enemies, Thor just scales better the more enemies there are. So lots of potential there. There we go, though. Let me know. What do you think of Thor? That's the initial look. In my opinion, we're going to have to see direct testing to see where his damage is. Like, he could come in and do, like, 0. It doesn't look likely, but he could do terrible damage. So stay tuned for a playtest. We'll playtest Thor. We will see how hard he's actually hitting. I think it's a difficult sell. Fusions that are attack damage are often difficult sells. But I think Thor probably pulls it off. I think there's enough interesting and unique things going on here that Thor, for me, becomes most likely a fusion that is absolutely worth doing. That's my initial thought. Like, yeah, the passive is really what's pulling it all together for me. Of being like, okay, damage dealer that can also be a crowd control monster and has tons of potential with like ally attacks and stuff like that. Yeah, I want him. I want him. So there you go. That's my initial impression of Thor. Let me know what you think. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.